Hello, welcome to today's webinar about the BMI, our Aperture card scanning process. We're going to talk about how we scan Aperture cards, and I'll just get right into some nuts and bolts before we get into the actual details. So first, before we get into the actual process, the purpose of today's webinar is first to illustrate the steps in an Aperture card scanning project so you know what is going on if you decide to work with us and send us your Aperture cards to digitize. We're going to address any concerns, answer questions. We have some time at the end. I'll get into that in a second. And of course, get you ready to scan your Aperture card. So, kind of in a nutshell, if you're going to work with a company like ours, you want to scan your Aperture cards to a digital format, you should know what goes into that project and what the steps are so you have a comfortable feeling about working with whoever it is, and that they even have a full process that they can tell you about before you work with them. All right, nuts and bolts. I always like to do this before getting too far along. So first, I think it's your right side, if you're looking at your screen, feel a little section where you can raise your hand if you can hear me. If someone could raise their hand so I know that it works. Okay, thank you. If you put it back down, just click it again. Now raise your hand if you can see my screen, which you should be able to see the nuts and bolts screen that I'm kind of circling around right now. Okay, perfect. So I know it works for a few people. We're good to go. So you are muted. You're not on video, so no one can see you. No one can hear you. Use the Q&A tool on that same right side. If you have any questions, there is a portion at the end that I'll check on any questions. If I don't see them along the way, there's time at the end. But if I do see them along the way, go ahead and fire them in as I go along. I'll try to answer them in line with the presentation. But if I don't catch them during the presentation, I'll get them at the end because there's a little section for it. Okay, so high level Aperture card digitization is just this. There's an Aperture card, a physical Aperture card. You're taking that and then you're converting it to a digital format. And typically most people think about TIFFs, PDFs, JPEGs, things of that sort. That's kind of a traditional method of digitizing, but that's the gist of it. You're taking these hard copy records and converting them to a digital format for various reasons: accessibility, security, preservation, whatever it is. You're taking those hard copies and creating a digital version. And the scanning methods are, on my left side here, that's what we think of kind of do it yourself. There are various types of scanners you can use to digitize your Aperture cards, but this is what's a Scan Pro. We used to actually sell these. You'll see a lot of these in like libraries, maybe building department lobbies, things of that sort. But one method is you get a machine and you digitize yourself, or we would do a digitization project for you, or a company like ours would do a project for you, and that would be called outsourcing, or just hiring a scanning company to do it for you because you don't want to buy the machines, you don't have the resources, expertise, whatever it is. So there's a do-it-yourself, or there's the outsourcing method. Now, yes, that is a microfiche sheet, but these scanners also scan Aperture cards. I just didn't happen to have a picture of an Aperture card on there, so I'm putting we call it production level scanners. So companies like ours will have these high quantity, high production scanners that can scan large quantities of Aperture cards. So now in the actual scanning process, I'll lay out each step here and then get into the details of each one as we go along. So, and before I get into that, there's a little asterisk down here that indicates it's part of the M1. So the M1 is something specific to BMI. It's the milestone 1, M1, proof of concept process. And I'll describe that more later on. It's just so you know now that there's an asterisk, that means that part of the process is also part of the M1, but you'll learn more about that later. So there's first contracting, scoping of the project, scope of work, SOW, basically coming up with what's going to be done. We'd have to receive the Aperture cards. We'd tag transportation containers. Your Aperture cards would go into secure storage. Then there's creating a job order, so translating the scope of work into an internal BMI job order. Pre-scan, scanning the cards, image processing after they've been digitized, indexing, and then delivery, getting the images and cards actually back to you. So I talked about do-yourself and then working with a third-party organization, company like ours. So we're talking about if we do the project. If you do the project, you get your own machines, decide to scan yourself, you're going to set up your own process. This is what we do if you work with us and we do it for you. Okay, first is the contract or creating the scope of work. So before we do a project with anyone, we need to have a scope of work that defines what we are going to do and what we're agreeing to do, and then getting it into a contract. So we're both on the same page. We know what the pricing is, the timelines, the exact specs, the specifications of the actual scanning, so that we have an agreement before we actually start getting into production. So that's the most important part, having that written agreement of what we're going to do, what you want the result to be for your Aperture cards, and how we're going to get there and how we're going to do it, and all the legalese that revolves around that. Not the most fun part. Creating the scope of work actually is engaging. It's fun to put together that project, but then there's the contract part. You have legal involved or procurement, all that, but it needs to be done to make sure we can actually get the project going, and we know what the payments are going to be, how it's going to happen, timelines, who's involved, points of contact. All that needs to be worked out as one of the first steps. Once that's in place, though, let's say we have that plan, we have the scope of work, we know what's going to happen. We need to get your Aperture cards somehow. And one method could be you ship them to us. You use FedEx, UPS, or the typical carriers we use when we're using shipping to and from our clients. If you're close enough, you might have one of our drivers pick up. This is actually Bernard, one of our unmarked vans. That's the back lot of our facility, our headquarters in Sunnyvale, California, where all microfiche, microfilm, and Aperture card scanning is done. So if you're close enough, we may have one of our drivers go pick it up. Maybe you want to drop it off. We've had clients do that as well, but a lot of times it's a combination of these. Maybe we go pick it up because you're somewhat local. Maybe you're in another state, but drivable. We get a driver out there, pick it up, and then maybe once it's digitized, we'll send it back to you via a third-party carrier. But really, many different ways this can be done. It all depends on your specific project, how many cards you have, where you are, and how you want this process to take place. But there are different methods to get the cards to us, but that's the most important. We have to get the cards to our facility so we can actually do the scanning. So once we get them, now they're back at our facility, we're going to tag the transportation containers. Usually Aperture cards are going to be in some sort of box. It could be a specific box that actually fits Aperture cards. We have some of those. Maybe you just put them in some bankers boxes, but you layer them up or pack them in there. Whatever packaging method you use, when they get to us, we're going to tag them. Now these tags are related to it's what's called MTS, or Material Tracking System. That's what we use. It's an internally developed system that we use for tracking materials and projects throughout each project. And it's within our homegrown Unity system. So you can imagine there's Unity systems, kind of the higher level application, kind of has its tentacles in everything we do. And MTS, Material Tracking System, is part of Unity. So keep that in mind, that Unity is the overarching system. MTS is just a piece of that for tracking projects. So we're going to get it, we're going to tag, not the individual cards, we're going to tag the boxes or containers that they're in with a client name. You see here, client name, the job number, the box number, when we received it. There's a barcode, so we can wand the barcodes wherever those boxes go. And I'm specifying that we're not tagging the individual cards, because you could have hundreds of thousands of cards, and we're not going to go through and tag each one. We're tagging the box they came in because that's the unit that it arrived. We're going to track it that way. And it wouldn't make sense to tag every single card. We will know how many cards there were once we start scanning, but for this purpose, for the receiving the materials and tracking, it's per the box. Then there's secure storage. So it's not like we get them and immediately we start scanning. There are some things that have to happen, which we'll get into a little more later. But while we're not working on the project, they'll go into secure storage. Now, our entire building, our headquarters facility specifically, is a secure facility. But even it's like an onion, there are different layers. But even within the outer layers of just who can actually access the building, there are secure storage areas within that outer layer. So there's a restricted storage area. We have an on-site vault, temperature, humidity control. That's especially essential for microforms, so Aperture cards, microfilm, microfiche. But while we're not working on your project, they're going to be in secure storage, because there's no reason for them to necessarily be just kind of floating around the building. We want them in a protected area while we're not working on them. So the building itself is secure, but even within that, we have various rooms that are additional security in that inner layer. So that's where they will be when we're not working on them. Okay, so mentioned before, you have the contract, the scope of work. That's kind of like a sales facing, a client facing version of the project. But what needs to happen once we actually get the materials and want to start working on it, your sales rep, the account executive, needs to translate that client-facing scope of work and contract into a BMI internal, basically production-facing job order. So this, what you're looking at, is it's actually a real project. It was one of my projects, and it shows the service lines that are involved in this specific project. But it's called SOP, which is scope of project. That's what we call it. It's also within our Unity system. So you remember I mentioned Unity is that overarching kind of umbrella for our internal systems. You have MTS as part of that. You have other applications part of that. But scope of project, SOP, is also part of Unity. So our salespeople will go in and they'll create this SOP based on the contract, the agreed to scope of work, to put it into basically project language for our team. So our team, project managers, plant managers, operators, they're not going to read the contracts and try to figure out what to do. That's for the sales side. But then they'll translate it for our production team. So they say, okay, here's what needs to happen in our language to make the project work. So here's an example of Salesforce for our CRM. So we put in an approved opportunity. We classify the material based on the content and data so that certain projects are handled certain ways. Milestone, I mentioned that before, that there's that proof of concept process. There's prices in here. It might be per job or per Aperture card. This one's was specifically for microfiche. Says how we're going to scan it. Grayscale and bitonal, 300 DPI. Yes, there are subcontractors allowed in this project. We're going to be creating PDFs. There's indexing. How we're going to deliver it, which is encrypted USB thumb drive. So anything that relates to actually executing the project will be entered into this SOP, which goes through its own approval process that then gets pushed to our project team, who will then use that to create your unique process flow. Every project, even though some can be very similar, will have their own process flow and own job assigned to it, which we'll show right here. Again, this is a real project. The name was changed, so it's not a real client, but the project itself is real. And this is what will get created. So this is an actual process flow. It's probably 20 something steps. Your project may be very simple, maybe 10, 15 steps. It could be very complex. Some have, I think, what was the, like 60 or 70 steps, which they can be quite complex depending on what needs to happen. But this is what we actually use to track the project when it's going on. And when we get your project, let me see here. Yeah. Well, I'm going to get back to the M1 later, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But basically, a project process flow will be created for your project. These are all the steps and what your project manager is going to do. Green means good, things are flowing along. Red and purple and blue mean maybe some exceptions or things that need to be reviewed. They're constantly tracking this along each step, saying, oh, look, there's some flags here. Maybe it's stuck for some reason, the material changed, something's just off. And they want to get things pushed along to the final portion, which is delivery and billing. And you can see here, this was actually microfilm rolls, but this column here means that roughly 800 rolls are in the configure roll XML stage. Over here, there are roughly, call that 50 rolls are in the process flow metadata stage. So you can see we can track however many units are part of this at each stage of the project. So if you contact us and say, hey, where are we? How far along? We can say, oh, you have 15,000 Aperture cards that are 90% done. You have some in this phase here, some in this phase here. But we know how many units are through the process flow, and over here means done. So your project will get a process flow when it's assigned to a project manager once we build that to execute the project. So that's the job order. Now production can start working on it. They create that process flow, and then we get into the pre-scan scanning. And I mentioned earlier that picture of the microfiche. I have a video here that shows a microfiche being scanned, a microfiche sheet. It's one of the ways that we can also scan Aperture cards. I just don't have a video of an Aperture card, but this is a great example of how things get scanned. Now there's pre-scan and scanning. Pre-scan is because we actually scan the card at a different light setting, so the physical card, than the actual microfilm sheet or the microfilm image on that Aperture card. So an Aperture card, again, if you're looking at it, looks like this. There's the card itself, and then there's that little aperture or hole that holds the microfilm. So there's the pre-scan that captures the card itself, and then there's the scanning that captures the microfilm image on that Aperture card. A little kind of nuanced stuff, but just that's why there's pre-scan and scanning. But here's an example of how these scanners work. So they are, I call it semi-automated. So you can see here, and it would be the same for Aperture cards, where they would pick up that the next Aperture card, put it in there, move along and scan. We typically put a small stack of them on there, and one of our operators will be monitoring it. They're not necessarily hand doing each Aperture card, but they have to monitor it because many times that hand, that grabber may grab a card, but it won't, the suction won't work well and it'll fall out and they'll have to go up and fix it. Or there's a computer up here that you can't see, it's a little off screen. They'll be monitoring the images that appear, and maybe the image didn't get captured well, or I'll play this again. The image didn't capture properly, or something got cut off. Whatever it is, that's why I call it semi-automated. Although we can put a stack on there, clearly it's an automated process. We have our scan operators monitoring these machines to make sure that they're actually grabbing the next card, they're moving along smoothly. We have to keep loading cards on there, and that the images captured are legible, and they're actually capturing what's supposed to be there, not missing images. So again, microfiche, but it's the same process for Aperture cards. And so I'm kind of going to scanning again. So that was because pre-scanning and scanning are pretty similar for the actual physical process of it. Here's scanning again because here's basically that. I think we were watching that one, but there's a computer, they're watching it, there's a job assigned to it, the calibrations for each project are in there, they're seeing the images pop up on screen to confirm that they worked and they got captured properly. This is one method of scanning. Another method is a smaller scanner. The difference is these scanners will capture the entire Aperture card. So the card, the physical card itself, plus the little microfilm image. These will only capture the microfilm image, but they can read holograph, which we will get to, I think, the next slide here. So keep that in mind why there are different scanners. All right, post-scan, so maybe after this, post-scan image processing. It's basically once the images are captured, there may have to be some processing that gets done to the actual images before being delivered and finalized. So in this example, this is a digitized image. So we captured the whole card, so that's that pre-scan. And then when the actual, the second part of the scanning happens, it captures this part of it, that aperture where the microfilm is. In this case, part of the image processing, the post-scan processing, is what we call framing or cropping. So if the scope of work said you're going to get one image per frame, and we delivered, let's say you had 10,000 Aperture cards, we delivered 10,000 PDFs, we'd likely include the actual physical card image, and then you'd have the second page of the PDF would be this entire frame. It would actually show just like that, not with the red box on it, but it would show just like that. So you actually have two images next to each other, just like it looks here. However, and a lot of times Aperture cards are 35 millimeter, like engineering drawings, plans, blueprints, things like that. So these are less common when they're multiple small image. But if you have multiple smaller images, you may say, I don't want a single image that shows those next to each other. I want each of those documents to be its own image. That's where framing and cropping would come in. So we would go in and say, yes, this is a separate image. Clearly, it's a separate document. We would create that as its own PDF, let's say, and then this would be its own PDF. So if you got a multi-page PDF, you'd have the card itself. That would be page one of the PDF. This would look like that, page two, and then this would be page three. So it would be a 3-page PDF rather than a 2-page that's the card and then just that frame. So that's one aspect of post-scan image processing. There's some QA, QC, quality checking, maybe some OCR, depending on the material type, like if it is drawings or blueprints. OCR, optical character recognition, which is text search, probably not applicable or not that great. But for images like this, if you have 10,000, 100,000 images and they're these types of documents, it might be useful. But that's that after scanning, we go through the image processing before delivery. So now indexing. So this is digital naming, and there are multiple ways to do that. Digital file naming. The most common for Aperture cards is just card level. So let me go back here. If we were doing card level, and this was the card, we would just name it by that. It would be 59710. We'd probably we would have a BMI unique identifier number, or UID. So it'd be 59710 underscore 123456, and there's your PDF. So that would be a simple card level file name. In this case, it would be something like, maybe our client says, hey, capture the street name if it's there, the app number, and the roll number. Well, there is no street name, so we'll just capture 8511138 underscore 502 underscore a BMI UID. There's your file name. Whatever's on that card level could be like this, where it's kind of fielded. It might be something like this, where it's just over here, or it might be something kind of a mix of the two, where there's some stuff over here, stuff over here. Maybe we're capturing only pieces of it, maybe we're capturing all of it, but that's card levels. What's on the card, which is replicating what you do now to find it anyway. So that's the high level, the simplest level. Next would be file level. So let's say we're not using the card itself, we're going to go to the image that's captured from that microfilm the image from that microfilm aperture, whatever's on there. It could be a drawing like this. It might be, if it's something like this, we might have to capture information from one page, from 2 pages, depending on what it is. But oops, go back this way. It's the file level, not using the card itself, using whatever image is on there. So here it might be like a title block, like we capture something from here. More difficult, more expensive, because card level is easy. The card will have something on it, most likely. It'll just be at the top. We'll capture whatever's on there. File level, now the images will change a lot. So it's not like the card will say you have 10,000. They're very similar. Sure, you might not have a street name. Maybe there's no app number, or the title blocks change a little bit, but we know we're capturing whatever's on that top part of the card. File level, images will change, drawing types will change. If there are multiple images on there, that could cause issues. It's doable. It's just a little more complex, and typically is more expensive because of the level of effort that has to be put into it to find the information. So it's doable. Just know why you're doing it. If the information is the same as the card level, that's very similar. Remember, you already access these by what's on the card. So you're replicating what you do now. I always recommend not to try to get too fancy. Replicate what you do now. You can always do more later. That's my recommendation. So there's file level. Image level would be like if you had those multiple images, and it's like, hey, it's not just they kind of are similar, but I mean more here. Like if you have multiple images in that frame, you're not just capturing one index point. Now you might have to be capturing 2, 3, 4, 5 different images. And I don't think I have an example here, but I've done projects where it was like oh, actually, this is an example. You can't really see the whole thing here, unfortunately. I didn't put that on, but there are actually 2 columns. It goes to about, let's say the card is roughly like that big. This column goes to about here. It's 2 columns of 16 millimeter duplex images, which means 2 images per frame. So you can see it kind of the top of the images here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then there are more on this side. That's a lot of images on one little strip, 2 strips actually. So you'd have to go to each image. So on one card, you might have 5, 10, 15, 20 different images to index, rather than just boom, get the card number or the card title. That's one index point, you move on. So becomes more complicated, a little more effort to get that done. Then there's holorith. Basically, these punch holes are referred to as holorith, and they typically should match the information that's on here. A lot of times you'll see information at the top and holorith punch holes. They should match. And what you can do is, using the scanner right here, that type of scanner, you run the card through, it'll only scan the aperture, the microfilm portion of the card, but it'll read the holorith punch holes, which should replicate the title information. So it can be a more inexpensive way to capture the data and kind of automatically name the files. So it'll scan this, say, hey, here's your image, and we're going to name it by that information, which should match this. The only issue is sometimes it just won't read. For whatever reason, it just doesn't read. Now you just don't have a file name. Or it just spits out a bunch of data, kind of a mishmash. It's not really fielded, like organized how you want potentially. So if you had something like this, and this had a holorith, maybe it comes out cleanly, But let's say you want the role to be first, and then the application number, and then street name, and then something else. We can reorganize that based on what we see here and how we can capture fields and kind of put a process in place. But Hollerith, it's just going to spit things out. We won't know what it means necessarily. So here's what you get. So there is a kind of a downside to Hollerith, but a lot of times it does work well, and it can get you what you need. And the reason the Hollerith was made, because it's replicating what's on the title anyway. The other downside, though, is you're not capturing the whole card. So if we scan this on those smaller scanners, you'd get the image and the file name. We wouldn't be able to give you that card image that shows you the historical context. So you have to weigh it, cost versus historical context and preservation versus potential file name issues and fielding. So if you're working with us, our account executive will probably do some samples with you, show you what it comes out as, and you can determine, yes, this works, or no, I need it like this. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then delivery, like I think I mentioned early on, when you think of scanning, a traditional method, we call it traditional, is like TIFFs, PDFs, JPEGs. So that's an option where we just scan these and say, hey, here are your PDFs of your Aperture cards. Another option, if maybe you have a system, but you want a backup, or you don't have an application to easily access these and you don't want to just be finding PDFs, is our digital reel hosted solution, which we would actually scan unless you're doing Hollerith indexing. Let's say you're using the larger scanners and you want to use a title, we would capture the entire card plus the image, of course, name it, and then we'd host it for you. And the benefit of that is you have adjustability from the image, so you can actually change the brightness and contrast. You have global text search. If you have 1 million Aperture cards, you can search all of them in sub-seconds. Even if you don't know where it is, just start typing what you need, it should find it. And backup redundancy. So if you have a system, you want to put them in there, you're probably going traditional method, having us send you whatever file types you need to load in that system. But this is an option, digital reel, if you don't have a system, or you need something that's a little more geared towards Aperture cards or micro forms like microfilm, microfiche, because there's the weirdness of that type of material. So it's an option for your delivery. Now, so that's the process for Aperture cards. They all are based on those 11 steps. Every project is unique, so we'll tweak it for your project, but that's the nice kind of bones, the framework. Now, the milestone, the M1 proof of concept process, which I mentioned, is some of those steps are part of the M1. I'll describe how we implement the M1 for you here. And it's basically a build, test, refine methodology. So if we're working with you, we have the contract, we get your cards, what we're going to do is we'll start our milestone by building your process flow. So before we just start scanning everything, let's again say it's 50,000 Aperture cards. We're not just going to receive them and start scanning 50,000 Aperture cards. We're going to build the process flow, and then we're going to test a small batch. Let's say it's all one document type. It's all building plans. We're going to take probably 10, 15 cards and run it through that entire process flow. Let's say it's 20 steps. And the reason we do that is because we want to, one, build the process flow for use during the project. We want to test that the process flow works based on the SOP that our salesperson created, which is based on your scope of work and contract. So we want to test that it works, that all the steps are hit, and to make sure the result is what we expect it to be. And then we can refine it if we find something that weird pops up or something doesn't work. But then also, we're going to review that with you, and we won't move forward until we get approval from you that the milestone is acceptable, it's correct, everything works. So if you see it, you're reviewing it with your account executive, and you say, yes, that's exactly what I want, it's what we agreed to, approved, then we'll go forward and start scanning the rest of the project and doing the processing. If something comes up, some anomaly during the rest of the project, of course, we'll contact you, we'll figure out what we need to do with it, if there are any changes needed. But usually it'll just continue on, the project will finish out, and we know, you already said, yes, I know what I'm getting, we provide it to you, everyone's happy. However, you may see during the M1 approval step something that you thought, oh, I thought I wanted to index this way, but I want to tweak it. Or we find something that says, hey, during this testing, we found something that no one knew about. It's outside the scope of work. We need to talk about this, of how we're going to to execute it or change the scope or whatever we need to do. So it allows us to protect ourselves, to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do and something doesn't kind of derail the project, but also make sure that you get to see it and you approve it before we move forward. Because we don't want to do a whole project and you say, that's not what I wanted. I didn't realize I was getting this. We want that written confirmation that everyone's on the same page and we can move forward. Okay, some considerations. I mentioned internal scanning earlier. If you're thinking about a do-it-yourself process, absolutely possible. Just consider, what are the available resources? Who's going to do it? Which of your staff or your people are going to do the scanning? Because while they're doing this, they're not doing maybe their primary job, whatever that is. Do you have the machines? Are you going to use those desktop machines that are made for more kind of research or smaller batches? Or are you going to try to get the more expensive production level like we have? Depending on how many Aperture cards you have, you'll have to figure out what would make sense. And then do you have the time? We are set up for this. We have many machines. We are meant to ingest large quantities of Aperture cards and other materials, large projects. We have the entire resources, security, software, hardware, everything set up. Your job is probably not to do digitization like ours is. So you have to think of, how am I going to apply this and who's going to do it? Systems and software. Do you have the back-end processing? Do you have the security around it? Where are these files going to go? How are you going to index them? Do the people that are going to be doing this know how to do it? They're going to have to spend a lot of time researching, figuring out something to get your IT team involved, to do some coding to fit with whatever other processes you have, other systems. These all have to be thought of. And then expertise in digitization. Do you have someone on the team that has digitized before, maybe came from another city, department, county, whatever it is, has done something like this, that can give you an idea of what to do and help with that? The outsource, there's the cost, and a lot of times, hey, wow, it's expensive for BMI to do it. Sure, but depending on the project, you're either spending with us or you're having your people. You have to buy machines. You're having your people do it, and they're not doing their job, whatever that job is, because they're busy digitizing. So they're not only spending time on this, they're also not doing something else. You can have an opportunity cost when your people are trying to do a secondary job. The security of your records, of course. Where are they? How are they being digitized? How are they being protected once they're in a digital format? Are they in a storage room somewhere? A lot of natural disasters now. If it's going to take you 2 years to scan, whatever, 200,000 Aperture cards, where it takes us maybe 4 months, if you don't go with a company that can do it quicker, will it be okay if it takes that long and then something happens to the records because you were saving money, but now there's a flood and those records are destroyed, you can't get them? So it's not just the cost of doing it, it's the cost of, what if something happens because we were trying to save money by not having someone else do it in a more efficient way, in a more secure way? Yes, there's the warm and fuzzy factor. If you're gonna be reaching out to companies about this, make sure you're asking a lot of questions, read their website, watch webinars like this, videos, read blogs. Contact multiple companies, ask about their security. Are they audited? What's their process? Do they have a process they can describe to you of how they'll do this work? So absolutely talk to multiple companies, but you have to have that warm and fuzzy gut feeling that you'll trust them with your records, because they may be one of a kind, only copy records that you're sending out to them. So you want to have that gut feeling that you're comfortable with. All right, that wraps up the Aperture card scanning process. If you've watched our microfilm process, our microfiche process, even our paper scanning process, you'll notice they are very similar, but there are just some nuances in between each, because the material does affect how the processes work and how the projects will be executed. But they are very similar, but it's good to see the specific materials of how they might play into your project. But if you have any questions, let me go check the chat to see if any questions did pop up during that last 20-30 minutes or so. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I must have done a great job. But if you have any questions after this, or something you thought of after the fact and you want to ask me directly, go ahead and there's my email there. You'll just go right to me. I'll answer the question for you. If you want to talk about your project, absolutely reach out to me. If you're not already part of it, you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can just hover your camera phone over this QR code. It'll take you to our sign up page. Just type in your email. You can opt out anytime. Every other Tuesday, you'll get an email with new articles, videos, and webinars and events coming up, so you can keep up with digital imaging and other content pieces like this. That's it. I'll do one last check. See if any questions are on there. No questions. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining and have a good rest of your day.